Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across Australia and the globe to train leaders, develop engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. And in 2020 and in 2021, we will continue to work with folks that want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how Dunn Street can partner with you, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Socially Democratic for the year 2020, your weekly centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And on this week's episode, just as we did 12 months ago, we're going to wrap up the year with my good friend and the number one Labor member for the Eastern region in the Victorian State Parliament. Harriet Shing will join us to basically summarise 2020 from a very Victorian-centric perspective, and we'll cover off as much as we possibly can in a year that was pretty crazy. So look forward to that. But before you do, don't forget to subscribe to Socially Democratic on your favourite podcast app or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher or Amazon. And if you are an Apple Podcast user, please don't forget to give us a rating and leave us a review. And be as honest as you like. We don't mind, but just make sure you leave a review. And for all the updates of the latest episode for Socially Democratic, don't forget to follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one on a Friday afternoon No, it's still morning. We're taping this one on a Friday morning in downtown Melbourne. It is the final episode of 2020. Exactly 12 months ago to the day, Harriet Shing came on the show and we broke down the year 2019. It was such a success that we've invited her back. Harriet Shing, Labor member for Eastern Region. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be both social and democratic in a year where I reckon both of those concepts have been severely tested, not just in Victoria and around Australia, but definitely around the world. So it's a joy, it's a delight. I plan to underwhelm, perhaps whelm, and looking forward to the chat.
I asked our producer, Rebecca, during the week to go back and listen to our episode just to double check what oracle of wisdom we may have predicted for 2020. Turns out we got a lot of things wrong. But one of the things that we did discuss early in the episode last year was you posed the question about 2019. You said, do you remember Egg Boy? And then you said, I wonder who's going to be Egg Boy of 2020. Now, just first of all, we need to remind everyone who Egg Boy was of 2019 for the viewers at home.
Who's ever going to forget Egg Boy? He was the courageous young chap who, in supporting our primary production sector by promoting eggs, sought to smash one over Fraser. I got 19 primary votes, Anning, by then embarrassing him. And he was then strong-armed off and given a stern talking to, but became a cult hero. And there was a fund set up to pay his legal fees, and he was then going to donate that to charity. And Egg Boy lives on in our hopes and our dreams about that unique Australian tendency to undermine authority.
So who was Egg Boy in 2020 then?
Yeah, there's a lot of Egg Boys, isn't there? I think Egg Boys probably, we've all been Egg Boy at some point or another throughout 2020 in wanting to actually walk past whatever system we don't agree with and sort of push it over. But I was thinking about Egg Boy recently, and I reckon the 2020 Egg Boy has been a woman called Zoe Salucci McDermott. And the name may not be familiar, but she is the young woman from Cobargo in New South Wales, in the Bega Valley, who, when Scott Morrison turned up after the bushfires with an entourage to capture his newfound empathy in meeting with people who'd lost their homes, who'd lost their sense of community, and who had nothing largely but the clothes they were wearing, was then encouraged to shake the Prime Minister's hand. And when that failed, her hand was lifted from her side in order to give the PM a handshake and thus a photo opportunity. But rather than giving the handshake, she kind of removed any contact with the PM and was then thought to be cast as someone who was just a little bit upset. So what that did is not just backfire spectacularly on the PM, but it then set into train this wave of rage against the PM in Cobargo, where in fact he had to leave. And so you see his four-wheel drive disappearing into the dust when he realises that Zoe wasn't the only one to in fact be incredibly outraged and grieving and frustrated and dismayed at the federal government's lack of action. So I reckon Zoe gets Egg Boy for 2020. And you look to Cobargo and you look to the recovery efforts, and it's again another tragedy of politics that it took a by-election in that area for anything to be done around rebuilding and recovery. So hats off to Zoe for being Egg Boy of 2020. She's since had her baby and gotten into some temporary accommodation, and is hopefully looking forward to a better 2021, and did so with a lot of community support, not just from the area, but around Australia.
3 votes to you, Harriet Shing. Well done. That's a really good point. She is Egg Boy for 2020, without a doubt. And that happened so long ago. Like those bushfires, we're coming up to sort of the anniversary of them really taking hold, certainly in New South Wales and stuff.
Well, we're in it now. Yeah. I mean, the Gippsland bushfires started in November, and they really took off shortly after Christmas. And we lost over 1 million hectares just in that region alone. It's been overtaken by, I think, other events in the public consciousness. But yeah, it's huge, and I think Zoe symbolised a lot of the nation's anger.
And those pictures that you spoke of just before of Scott Morrison visiting those towns and just looking like a fish out of water, just looking really, really uncomfortable, were terrible, terrible pictures for him. And now I think about that and think about this professional photographer that he's brought on staff to do these staged, also awful pictures. But I think what they're doing is they've looked back to the start of the year and gone, well, that was shithouse. We really need to fix your image because that was bad. And so let's just stage stuff with you building a chicken coop or standing in the friggin' hallway of the lodge with your bloody shorts on and a suit shirt, this kind of crap.
Don't you think that shot about him standing in the hallway with the top half is all business and the bottom half is all, I'm a relaxed, casual guy. I reckon there's a reason that they moved to stills photography, because as soon as he opens his mouth, everyone sort of winces collectively because you can't do post-production to fix that mess. But the other thing was, I suspect it was carefully crafted as a nod to Tom Cruise's sliding through the hallway with socks on in Risky Business, and that, in fact, Scott Morrison's demographic is probably itching for him to be compared to the popular leader of Scientology in the free world. So, that occurred to me when I looked at those photos. But the chicken coop and the curry and the putting up the Merry Christmas signs, all of that, I reckon, is an attempt to undo the damage of Scott sitting in a deck chair in Hawaii while Australia burned. And the great challenge for Australians is not to forget what has happened with a Prime Minister who is on the record as saying, I don't hold the hose, mate, and who is on the record as saying that, in fact, Victoria should have opened aged care visitation, should have opened our borders, should have opened our economy when we were experiencing caseloads that were rapidly going up and, in fact, got well into the 700s as far as COVID positive cases was concerned. If we'd listened to the Commonwealth, if we'd listened to Scott Morrison, if we'd listened to Greg Hunt and to Josh Frydenberg, we would be in a very different position now. And so I think it's, as far as the spin doctors are concerned, as far as the image managers and perhaps the empathy consultants are concerned in Canberra, it's best if Scott Morrison doesn't talk.
let's talk about 2020. And you've started to already kind of move into some of the major things that happened in this year, particularly around the response to the coronavirus. What moment, when you think about the moment that defined 2020 for you, what is that moment?
There are so many. There are so many, because it's as though 2020 has thrown every unpleasant curveball at the world that we could possibly have imagined, and so many that we couldn't have even contemplated. I reckon the thing that defines 2020 and the symbol of it, as far as the destruction of so much of our environment from the bushfires. Again, I think of images of people taking their own clothes off to collect native animals in agony while the world burned. And I think of, the East Gippsland fires and images of pyroconvective columns, these vast tornadoes of white hot heat that create their own weather, just ripping through areas, whether there was fuel or not, for them to burn, and these bleached white landscapes that only days before were thick with vegetation. I think they're some of the defining characteristics for regional communities. And then in political terms, I think there are images of the emergency hospitals, the emergency morgues, the ramping ambulances, and the frontline health workers in full PPE with bruised faces, not just from Victoria, not just from New South Wales after Ruby Princess, but from around the world. And I think that's the enduring theme of this year, is a lack of control over what's been happening to us in the world. And in electoral terms, the lack of control has continued with Donald Trump, well, at least as we have this conversation now, persisting with this theory that, in fact, he has won the election. It's just a matter of time before everyone else wakes up and realises it. So I think they're the three things. If you're asking me to narrow it down to one, there's no way that I can do that without getting into some significant internal battles about what's more important.
Yeah, look, of all the years that you were to do a summary of a particular year, I think 2020 definitely is proposing a challenge because of the amount of events that happened this year. And we had some of your federal Labor colleagues on the show last week to do a sort of a breakdown of 2020 from a federal perspective. Victorian Labor MP for McNamara, Josh Burns, and Queensland Labor MP for Lily, Annika Wells. And, there's one of the things that those guys talked about was there were so many small things that happened that would have been big in any other year, but just sort of for some reason paled into significance because what was going on politically in the United States, what was going on here in Australia, and what was going on globally in terms of COVID just meant that it was hard to kind of keep up with the news, really. It was almost exhausting. Well,
we've had the succession of 1 in 100-year events. How can you then narrow that down? And how can we also not forget about the things that have happened at a local level, at a grassroots level, that have also changed individual lives and individual communities that have nothing to do with the pandemic, that have nothing to do with bushfires or with droughts or with floods or with Donald Trump?
The one thing I stayed away in terms of the conversation, away from the Victorian-centric feeling about coronavirus and the various lockdowns that we went through. So I wanted to save that for this particular episode, since this is a particular Victorian-esque episode. But I was thinking about 2020, and I was thinking about the impact that it had, particularly down here in Victoria. I was in Sydney during the week. For work, just for the day. And I was talking to someone who had sort of welcomed me at this office that I was going to meet some people, and they would show me up to the main floor, and I was getting escorted up in the elevator, and I was just making chit chat to the person who signed me in, and they sort of said, I said, how's your day going, that kind of stuff. And he turned to me and said, I'm really glad that coronavirus is over. And I was... and I don't know if I still have Victorian PTSD, but I picked that up from a number of people in Sydney in that day, that as if, we're done now, it's finished. And I think that in Victoria, it's kind of I feel like it's a different vibe, right?
Absolutely, and I think there are a number of things that are unique about the Victorian experience that make it impossible for people from other states to understand. No one who is a commentator from Canberra, no one who is a political leader who is focused on the Commonwealth, even if they live in Victoria, hi Josh Frydenberg, hi Greg Hunt, in the event that you're listening to this, will understand what it took to not just get and secure the leadership that we had, and again, not just from a political perspective, not just from the Premier as he stared down the barrel of relentless pressure to ease restrictions, but also from the Chief Health Officer, from the public health team, from all of the epidemiologists and contact tracers and people working around the clock, whose best advice was, we cannot afford to do anything other than a hard lockdown. The Premier can stand up and say that for 120 days in a row, and people can tune in record numbers to live streamed press conferences that go for more than an hour for that entire time. But without the social licence, without the groundswell of community ownership that ensured that people wore masks, that people complied with curfews that had never been introduced in the state before, that people, once we got over our extreme obsession with toilet paper, went back to supporting and caring for others who needed a sense of community in an environment of unprecedented isolation and lack of connection, that our economy in dealing with the massive downturn in output and in revenue, continued with Zoom, continued with remote learning in our schools, continued with the provision of services and commerce through non-physical and non-interactive means other than in two dimensions. And now when you look at maskless faces around Victoria, when you look at the succession of days, where we're coming up to 50 days with no new locally transmitted cases, and we've recommenced the hotel quarantine program, so we're taking in new international arrivals, there's a sense of joy and relief, along with the fatigue and the grief that everyone's experienced through 2020. And there's a sense of, again, ownership that no other state can understand, that no other territory can understand, that I think will always be one of the hallmarks of Victorian endurance and innovation and resilience and care for those around us. And no matter what the PM says, no matter what Josh Frydenberg says, no matter what people try to hurl at us as a state, whether it's Murdoch media, whether it's specials being run on Sky After Dark, it cannot change the fact that we went from cases that were over 700 a day in new figures, and we got them down to zero. And that's why this achievement and this outcome belongs to everyone. But that constant vigilance here in Victoria, we are well practiced with. People know that they need to take a mask wherever they go. People know that there are ongoing restrictions that are there to make sure that we can manage the numbers of strangers who gather in places where there's no QR code in place. People will put their masks on before going to a supermarket or a shopping mall, before getting onto a tram or a train. And in comparison to other states, we look at New South Wales now, where the Premier had urged people to wear masks, but where there was no requirement to do so. And you look at the cultural buy-in that exists in Victoria that doesn't exist in New South Wales, much to the frustration, I think, of many people who live in that state. And when faced with clusters now that need to be managed, there's, I think, a lack of preparedness around understanding the virulent nature of this virus, where one case becomes 100 in a week and becomes 1,000 in 2 weeks. So in Victoria, I think we stand alone as having not just contemplated the pandemic, but having actually had to walk through the fire of what those numbers meant and having come through the other side.
I coach public narrative as a part of sort of the organising framework. And the public narrative contains a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now. And the story of us is a way of explaining sort of the past stories that bring alive, our shared experiences, shared challenges that we face as a community, and where we find the courage and hope to come out the other end. And you always, when you're coaching public narrative, because it can be a little bit kind of, not confusing, but it's a difficult sort of thing to kind of get across, it's best to explain it with good examples. And I've always needed good examples for Story of Us, particularly depending on the group you're sort of coaching it with. And if I'm ever going to be coaching a group of just Victorians, and if I ever want to draw upon a story of us that we've experienced this year, 2020, in particular, that second lockdown, if we've ever wanted a story of us in Victoria, this has been it. And I really felt like that throughout this second lockdown, that there was a challenge. Every good narrative needs a plot, a character, and a moral. There was definitely a plot. We knew who the characters were, that we knew who the protagonists were, and we knew who the antagonists were. The protagonists were, the people of Victoria that stayed in Victoria, essential workers, the leaders that stood up like Daniel Andrews, and we knew who our antagonists were, the Liberal Party, the Herald Sun, certain journalists, the Josh Frydenbergs, Greg Hunts of this world. And we knew what the moral was, and it was about pulling together. It was about solidarity in isolation, which is a weird concept really when you think about it, but it works, right? I just sort of, I'm not a very jingoistic, patriotic type of person, but even at the end of this, I felt really proud about being a Victorian. I just sort of thought, wow, this has been incredible, and we've done it together. It's been tough. And I think that coming into this sort of festive season, Victorians should feel rightly proud about what they've achieved over the course of this year, because that wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination, and the impact that, it didn't directly impact on me personally, but I know that a lot of Victorians out there were hurting financially, mentally, their health, you name it. It was a stress. And I just think it's a remarkable achievement for a state and a community. And also, a lot of people talk about there's no such thing as community anymore, but I just think that myth is blown out of the water this year because people looked after each other.
Absolutely. And it's again, to link the bushfires and the pandemic together, there were so many small communities in the bushfires with, the sky was purple. It was like a bruise, and then everything went black, and then the flames would arrive, and communities were cut off. And in many cases, they were cut off for days and days and days after the fires were actually somewhere else. And people banded together in ways that meant that buildings and shelters were protected, even while so much else was lost. And you extend that out as a metaphor or as a really kind of apt and tragic descriptor for what happened in Victoria. There was a preparedness to step up. And that's really, I think, where that pride is forged, and where that sense of collective ownership of survival comes from. And no matter how proud people might be of a sense of municipal connectedness, until that's tested, you don't really know how strong it is. And in Victoria, we were tested not just across the state, but within our geographic communities, within our cultural communities. We were tested on whether we are racist, whether we in fact have a dark, unpleasant underbelly that we have to face, whether we are prejudiced against people who live in the flats, whether in fact we are not able to communicate effectively messages of public health. And we came through it. And yes, there's been so much to learn, and yes, there have been mistakes made, but you look at what has happened to winnow the state in a way that no one could have expected. And that is the sense of identity that will shape our state and our schools and our families and our workplaces, I think, for years to come while we recover. And that I think one of the great opportunities we have is to hold on to, as far as we can, the good things that came from this year amidst all of the hardship and the tragedy, because there were good things. We found people were all of a sudden able to access telehealth, that people all of a sudden were able to learn the names of their neighbours, were able to, in fact, work together to make sure that the neediest in our communities were, in the best way possible, not left behind. And we saw repurposing of public infrastructure and resources. In the Parliament in Victoria, for example, the then President of the Upper House, Sean Lean, started a program to use the Parliament kitchens to make meals because Parliament wasn't sitting, the resources were there. And to date, we've had over 800,000 meals prepared using infrastructure and those services there that have been distributed to people who would otherwise have gone without. And we need to make sure that we keep at that, because this has been also our pride.
Yes, and without sounding like I'm picking on other people here, but there are some people that don't get to share in that. And it's those Victorians that pissed off to Noosa with their holiday houses as soon as the second lockdown was about to come on. And I was like, don't you come back to Victoria and then try and claim some sort of Victorian, this has been an amazing achievement. No, not for you, it's not, because you're all pissed off when it got a little bit too hard for you.
Well, you may have made that. I mean, there was a lot of sourdough being baked in the first lockdown, and everyone liked to think of it as almost a state-sanctioned slumber party where people could all just get out their best designer PJs and get active on Instagram. The second lockdown was the source of a lot of grief. And you're right, there is a relatively large group of people who not only went to Noosa, who not only went to other parts of the country to get away from the inevitable hardship and isolation that those restrictions involved for us all, but who also went down to their holiday houses and disappeared to the peninsula to enjoy a bit of beachside ambience, while others, families in apartments with no balconies, stuck it out and taught their kids with the assistance of teachers in a remote learning environment, who went to the doctor in a Zoom meeting, who stuck with curfew, who limited exercise and meeting up with people and even conversation that is so important to sustaining our stamina. And there's a lot of people who I think will be retrofitting the narrative of how they survived the pandemic and all that they did to help those around them. And that's inevitable. There's, in every situation, whether it's from party political environments through to what people like to tell as tall tales at the pub or at the bistro, if you're talking about people who may have headed to Noosa, there is always a tendency to make yourself the hero and to perhaps reverse engineer what someone else's story might have been to fit it into your own life. And that's the way of it. But those who did it, we know what we did. We know what we went through and we know what we survived.
Can we talk about the leader, our Premier, Daniel Andrews, for one moment? Because I think that in so many ways, his leadership defined what Victorians went through as well. A moment that stands out for me that summarises 2020 is I was, during the second lockdown, and Daniel was about to stand up and do press conference, 57 or whatever it was. Who knew? I don't know how far through he was, but it was sort of in the down the stretch of the whole lockdown. And I was walking to get a coffee that morning. My designated job every morning was to go get the coffee for the household. And as I was walking down one of the alleys to cut through to one of the only coffee shops that was actually still open in the CBD, there was a kitchen hand or a chef sitting on the back step of sort of the back entrance to this particular restaurant that would have been closed but would have been producing food to, keep their business running. But he was having a bit of a break. And he was sitting on the back step having a durry, and in his hand was his phone turned sideways, and he was watching the Premier's press conference, and he yelled out to some of the people in the kitchen, "He's on now." And other people came out, and that's just as I was walking past. The amount of people that tuned in every day to listen to our leader talk directly to the Victorian community about what we were going through, and looking for both important information, but also some hope and inspiration as well to get through this, was an incredibly unique moment, I think, in Australian politics, but even more broadly than that. I just want to get your thoughts on the role that Daniel has played for Victorians.
Well, I agree with that, and I think leadership is as much about the way in which you share a path with others. And I think good leadership is defined at its best by the ability to bring people along in a way that creates a shared space and shared ownership for the difficult things, because it's really easy to be a leader when things are good. It's when you're tested, in fact, that you get that sense of true grit in action, or you get a sense of leadership falling apart. And I'm a well-known and very vocal fan of the Premier, and I always have been. But many were not convinced, and I think many people had a sense of scepticism, not just about the Premier, but also about politicians at large. And there was a persistent idea that we are out of touch, that we don't connect with people, that we don't understand what's happening, and that we're only interested in our own future or our own success, self-interest being the driver there. And what we saw with the Premier's press conferences day after day was, I think, a twofold effect. Firstly, it was absolute transparency. And it wasn't just about saying, here's a level crossing that we've completed, we're going to cut a ribbon and we're going to celebrate it, and people then starting to realise after the fact that those sorts of infrastructure investments have actually been really good for the community. It was, on one level, about getting information, and you're right, tens of thousands of people tuned in to those press conferences. It was about his preparedness to stand in front of the media every single day until every single question had been answered. And there's often been a lot of criticism of the Premier from certain parts of the media for a refusal to be interviewed by hostile outlets or programs. But this really put paid to that, because every journalist was able to attend. Every journalist was able to ask the questions that they wished to ask. But in a sense of, I think, difficulty for the media, everybody on social media was able to hear the Premier's answers and then to hear the questions that were being asked. But the other part of, I think, the endurance that the Premier showed was evident in the humanity that he brought to the whole thing. This wasn't just a crisis in theory. This wasn't just a sense of successive hypotheticals or speculation about where things were going. People saw every day a man becoming tireder and tireder, in the same way that all of us were being worn down by the stress of what was occurring. And he showed up without fail to continue the conversation that was unpleasant, that was hard, that was heartbreaking. And that was despite all of the pressure that came from Canberra, from parts of the Liberal National coalition in Victoria and more broadly, from large sections of the media. And he was very clear about saying, and again, this really challenged, I think, a lot of perceptions around what politicians do and what drives us to participate in the way that we do, that this was about, in fact, doing more than politics and taking decisions that are in the interests of the public and of public health, rather than being popular. And that was a hard thing to do. But seeing that work succeed, seeing that modelling explained to people in really, really clear terms, so that people could appreciate the rationale behind lockdowns. That not only created the sense of community buy-in, but it also dispelled a lot of the myths around politicians and what they do when they're doing well. And we started to see the North Face jacket. And that's also where we saw that buy-in around flickers of hope and a sense of collective ownership of progress. And that's where, again, it comes down not only to what the Premier has done, but the fact that he has relentlessly said that this is about not being political, it's not a political narrative, but he's also celebrated at every turn and recognised and respected the work of our frontline workers, of people who have showed up time and time again, putting themselves at risk, but also the fact that the work and the achievement and the progress is all down to what every Victorian's done.
So much to unpack in what you've just said there. And I want to start with the media and allow me to get on my high horse. How did they get this so wrong? And this is a collective slap in the face to all of the journalists, although there are some journalists in there that I do love dearly and are very, very talented writers. But broadly speaking, the media class got this, they completely misread the community on this, and they wrote about it for so long. And then when they realized that they got it wrong, instead of them putting their hands up and say, my bad, they doubled down. They actually doubled down and started writing things like, oh, this is very dangerous for the Premier to, to be making decisions that could politically jeopardise his popularity. And that's when I sort of went, I just don't think you get the Premier, and I don't think you ever have really, because at some point along that journey for the Premier, and it may not have even been this year, but at some point he sort of, I think he just went, you know what? I'm just going to keep on doing the things that are right for the community. And I know that cynics don't agree with that, but I genuinely do think that the Premier has done that. He's just said, from now on, the decisions that we make are the decisions that are going to be for the betterment of the people. And if that doesn't fly well politically, then so be it. And he definitely doubled down on that during the crisis, during the second pandemic. And the media could not wrap their head around that at all. Then what happened is then they started to get this backlash because they were being held accountable every day as well in these press conferences because everyone got to hear their stupid questions. There were some good questions in there as well, but a lot of them were just the dumbest questions ever. And Twitter just lit up about it, and social media's lit up about it. And so then they started to feel the heat for the very first time in their entire careers. And then they got their back up. And then they started writing about themselves, which I thought was incredibly selfish in the middle of a pandemic when you should actually be writing about, that's what, and people started getting pissed about that. They're going, no, I need you to ask questions on these particular issues that are relevant to my life in terms of what's happening with the schools, what's happening with, where do I wear a mask, what supermarkets are going to be open. Could you please do follow-up questions on the things that the Premier's telling us about right now? And they weren't doing that because, the Rachel Baxendales of this world are getting, texts from their masters in Canberra or Sydney telling, no, you need to, this is the angle I want you to ask questions on. And they lost their audience. They completely lost their audience. And I thought that in itself is a subtext story of 2020 was the failure of the media to cover this in a way that should have been done. I just found that both interesting and shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the great challenge for parts of the media in all of this was how to create the most divisive narrative possible for a government that's been not only extremely successful in electoral outcomes, but which has consistently not really cared what the media has been publishing. And I think back to the fire services reform and to the work associated with changing very deep-rooted cultural divisions around the CFA and the MFB, and there were well over 24 front pages dedicated to the Premier's evil intent around this to in fact end volunteerism across Victoria. Not only did that not happen, but the changes went through and have been in large part the source of increased funding and increased engagement around fire risk. And to see the pandemic occur in the way that it did, not just in actual terms, not just on the ground, but in the public narrative, was absolutely extraordinary. We heard questions on everything from where the Premier was on his birthday through to why it was that that masks couldn't go without being worn in certain circumstances as a denial of personal liberty, through to questions around why it was that Victoria had not engaged in certain quarters of the media's view with the ADF or with the Commonwealth government, through to why it was that, in fact, Daniel Andrews wasn't listening to the view of the people. And the way in which those questions were asked was not only something that did a great disservice to certain journalists as far as their reputations are concerned, but it also stopped being about questions after a while. And, you know, the Premier called this out to a number of people in saying that there were extended statements, monologues, that didn't actually end in a question, that in fact were just about trying to pick a fight. And trying to pick a fight in a live streamed event so that might then make useful television for a niche part of the market down the track. And it didn't work because people, I think, started to see the machinations of, I want to use inverted commas around this, journalism, and have felt a sense of growing cynicism around it. And once that starts, that's really, really hard to pull back with. And there were also journalists there who, to their credit, focused on the detail, which may have been about criticism, absolutely. And the Premier was clear to say it's your absolute right to criticise, but focused on the detail and the substance of what was happening, because the first and most important priority was making sure that people were aware of what was going on and were aware of the challenges that we were facing and how we were meeting them head on. But it hasn't helped the reputations of a lot of journalists. It hasn't helped the regard in which a number of outlets are held. And we, you know, again, for better or for worse, are faced with challenges in other states, with breaches in hotel quarantine, with problems with private security in New South Wales, in South Australia and other jurisdictions. And the media has been completely silent on it. So, you know, we will always have this environment where the nature of media ownership means that criticism will come relentlessly to a Premier like Daniel Andrews. The fact that he continues to do what has been necessary is the thing that defines him and will define him as, I think, one of the great political leaders that Australia will ever see. And now we've got a budget that everyone's banging on about as being irresponsible and reckless. That's been responsible for our AAA plus credit rating being dropped to AA by Standard & Poor's. And again, the media is getting it wrong. The opposition is getting it wrong, because where you have $89 billion of spend, which is intended to turn around the unemployment rate, to build infrastructure, to invest in recovery and healing, that's actually something that's been met in enormously positive terms for people, because it means more money in the bank for families. And those families don't care about what Standard & Poor's thinks. And when even they are encouraged to care about it, the bottom line is that our economy is now, in fact, recovering at a much faster rate than was anticipated. And we know that there's data that suggests that our economies will be completely recovered in 4 years' time. And you see that in Victoria, we've started to bring the unemployment rate right down. I mean, in the last 2 months, it's gone from, we've created 82,000 and 74,000 new jobs, respectively. That's in a 2-month period. And everyone was quick to demonise Victoria and say, well, unemployment is hitting record highs. We are an economy in Victoria that is reliant on services and programs and hospitality and education, all of which were the sectors hardest hit by the pandemic. Now that they're starting up again, we can see that those numbers in jobs are going up. We can see that people have take-home pay. We can see that our retail and hospitality are opening up again. We've got voucher schemes for people to go on holiday in regional Victoria, and we've got that sense of pride. So all of those things together really make it very hard for a hostile media to take root.
You know, that the AAA credit rating used to mean something to me when I was younger. And I know that when Victoria lost its AAA credit rating under the Kane years, it was sort of seen as, this is a disaster. And, you know, there is an argument that, you know, the economy was in a pretty bad state then. However, I feel less inclined to take advice from a credit rating agency such as Standard & Poor's after I watched The Big Short, in that scene where Steve Carell goes into Standard & Poor's and says, why aren't you reducing the rating on these subprime mortgages when we all know they're worth shit? and you know they're worth shit, and you won't reduce them, and you're all saying that they are gold standard mortgages. And the woman said, well, we can't do it because the other credit agency, Moody's, won't reduce it, and if we reduce it, people won't come to us and we'll lose business. So I was like, okay, these ratings are a bit of a joke, really. So when it dropped in Victoria, I was like, who cares? And also, it didn't get reported. It got dropped in New South Wales as well.
Exactly, but it's also getting dropped. Credit ratings are being adjusted all around the world, and this is where, again, nobody talks about this in certain outlets as far as the discussion on changes to government balance sheets in other jurisdictions. We look again at Sweden, where restrictions were much lighter, where the death toll has been higher because of that, where cases in the health system have been stretched because of the nature of civil liberties and freedom of movement and freedom of expression during a pandemic hasn't been, I suppose, offset by the importance of public health. That economy has also taken a massive hit. The New South Wales economy, whilst remaining open and whilst restrictions were not put in place to anywhere near the extent of Victoria, also suffered a hit. And you're right, the credit rating's been downgraded there. And I think it's as much because of a sense of embedded reluctance and fear within communities that even though they're not wearing a mask, even though they're not required to curfew, even though there may not be limitations other than in specific hotspot or outbreak areas, people still have a reluctance to spend, to have connections with other people, and to risk transmission. Again, in that way that even where there's not an edict or a set of restrictions or public health directions from the government will affect the bottom line. And we also know that around the world, with the UK now looking to tier 3, with Ireland introducing a curfew, with the US experiencing one death from COVID every 30 seconds, and those numbers being out of control in, I think, all but Hawaii, every other state is in fact on high red classification for the numbers of new cases, that economies globally will in fact be devastated for years to come. But it's then about the fact that without public health being looked after and managed, we can't rebuild economies. And in Victoria, we've really had to face some very uncomfortable and awful and tragic truths about, for example, federally managed aged care facilities, support for people who need it most and who are vulnerable to health challenges like the pandemic because of, for example, their economic or social circumstances. And you can see that we've got a lot of work to do as government, as a community, to take care of insecure work, to provide buffers for people who are otherwise vulnerable. And around the world, unless we tackle these sorts of challenges, we will see in further pandemics down the track, because sure as egg boys, we're going to see more of this sort of challenge down the track.
What is a moment that would fall under the category of, I forgot that happened this year for you?
Oh man, there's so many things I want to forget. So it's, I think, a distinction between things that you had forgotten and things that we really just want to put out of our minds. And I think I had forgotten, and this is also something I'm very happy to have forgotten, and I will forget immediately after this chat, that Tim Smith had banged on about the bats. I think off the back of the rumour mill on wet markets being the source of the virus in the context of a bat soup. And in fact, this was, I think, something that may have been cooked up, excuse the pun, as a cute little way to try to capitalise on people's misgivings about the state government's response to the seriousness of the pandemic. And just to continue, I mean, this thing about bats was just extraordinary, wanting to move the bats on. And if that's not a grand metaphor for having to deal with perhaps communities that are not desirable to people who might otherwise have ended up in Noosa, then again, I don't know what is. But then to see tweets from this guy he's a member of Parliament, calling the Premier a friendless loser for not being able to in fact enable people to get out and to catch up and have a drink with their friends. And to see him then create a rather unfortunate set of memes, I think inadvertently by placing donuts in a rather specifically and profane way on a tweet, and I'll encourage people to look that up if you're not familiar with it, that led to some rather interesting hashtags. This is the quality of politics that causes so many people in our communities to tar us all with the same brush and to conclude, in fact, that not only are our hearts not in it, but that's a game. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I think that so many people looked at, again, Daniel's press conferences, so many people looked at their local members working so hard from any political party to try to be there for community and be part of our communities that were hurting. And, someone like Tim just comes along and ruins it all. But good on him. If it's to win Twitter and to increase followers, then that's great. But we'll always have the donuts.
You may have taken the answer for the next question, which was, what's your "Are you kidding me" moment of 2020? Because the donuts probably is a good. A good. Are you fucking kidding me? Is that actually what you did? Did you not notice that was a penis? But what is your "Are you fucking kidding me" moment for 2020?
Well, in a Victorian context, I think probably the about face from opposition leader Michael O'Brien, or Mr 15%, as he's known for his approval rating, calling for quarantine for people to be locked up at home for ankle bracelets, and then in fact saying that there was a deprivation of liberties and a contravention of the Charter of Human Rights. I have never been more gobsmacked, and this is one for all the nerds out there, than to hear those in the Liberal Party who introduced move-on laws, in fact, and tried to curtail unions' rights to protest when they were last in government, in fact, espousing the benefits of freedom of political expression, and in fact saying that people should be able to gather wherever and however they want, but this draconian government had in fact nobbled those rights. That's just been kind of extraordinary. I felt like I was in a Big Brother kind of surreal parallel universe, hearing that stuff where I was being asked how many fingers were being held up until I relented and agreed that it was 5 rather than 4. That's been gobsmacking, and again, that's really laid bare the stupidity of politics, and again, that lowest common denominator. More broadly, I reckon Donald Trump's got to get a mention. It's just, drinking bleach, using light to destroy COVID in people. The way in which truth has become, 2020 was the death of truth in so many parts of the world, where Western narrative is the dominant force. And you think about Donald Trump and everything that's been said by him and about him, and no matter how hard we push against ridiculous claims such as bleach and hydroxychloroquine and light being the best way to in fact cure COVID, he's kind of the international Pete Evans, which is it's sad. But when we think about all of that, there's this undercurrent of the QAnon brigade, that's all of a sudden decided that in fact there's this blend of armies coming together in the name of far-right politics and the Proud Boys movement, for want of a better term, along with the anti-vaxxers, along with the conspiracy theorists, along with 5G, and you name it, this has been a triumph for people with alternative fringe beliefs to really come together and to get airtime, because news outlets look for alternative views and they will give them coverage no matter how irresponsible that is. So, yeah, I reckon the Don is the one who gets it for me internationally, and then locally it's Vince Green's O'Brien.
Look, I know that it's not easy to be an opposition leader right now at a federal level or at a state level, and it's been interesting to watch all of the various opposition leaders deal with their role in the pandemic, and they've all tried different things. But when I look at Michael O'Brien and the Victorian Liberals, when they do their sort of year in review, not on a podcast, no doubt, but certainly get together, they have to look back and go, strategically, we kind of stuffed that up, I think. Like, I think that they probably played it the worst out of all of the opposition leaders. And I don't know if it actually was Michael O'Brien's idea to just, one, start off by flip-flopping about their attitude towards whether or not we should go to full lockdown or whether it's actually as serious, we're going to treat this coronavirus seriously, to then just being belligerent. But I feel like he was certainly getting manipulated by the hardliners within his own caucus. And now he's getting berated by his own hardliners, to which I would assume he'd be turning back and going, hang on a minute, dickheads, this was your idea all along. You wanted me to do this from day one. And I just think it's hysterical to see how they're now imploding on him. And there's, leading to that last week, and you've got a better idea because you've been walking the halls of Parliament. There was all those rumours about a lib spill and Matthew Guy returning to the front bench and Tim Smith, and they're a disaster.
Those rumours persist. I mean, again, it's sort of extraordinary. There's a lot about politics that I don't understand, which means that it probably doesn't bode well for a lot of people who look toward politics from outside the tent. But you're absolutely right. When we see the go hard approach from Michael O'Brien, who was not prepared to give an inch around collaborative work with the Premier, even going so far as to say that he hadn't been able to meet with the Premier and that was the Premier's fault, rather than offering any sort of collaborative process whereby the opposition could, in fact, get on board and start to share the importance of public health messaging and in the importance of these difficult restrictions. When we look at that strategy or tactic, I think, because it's not too cheap to be a strategy. And we look then as a contrast to what happened in South Australia. We saw Peter Malinauskas, in fact, send that public letter to Stephen Marshall, the Premier, saying very clearly, we want to work with you. We will facilitate the ongoing operations of government in the interests of getting through the pandemic wherever we possibly can. And it's that sort of statesmanship that not only proves Malinauskas' leadership chops, but also, in fact, has really important outcomes and benefits literally to the lives of people who depend on good leadership. Again, in the States, Joe Biden was absolutely collaborative in spreading public health messages, working alongside governors, working alongside government, working alongside medical officers and expert opinions, being seen wearing a mask. Those are the sorts of messages that make all the difference when you think about the risk of transmission being cut by around 2/3 when people are wearing a mask and in close proximity to each other. And then we have, again, the divisive politics of Donald Trump and all of his mates going to the Rose Garden to swear in a Supreme Court judge, or to seek that outcome, and everyone coming down with COVID and that being downplayed when we're talking about people, particularly in poor areas, dying because of that lack of leadership. And so, that's we've seen examples on both sides of politics in Australia in state jurisdictions, and we know what's worked. We know that in South Australia that collaborative approach has worked for the opposition leader there, and we know, to the disgrace of, and I think shame of many Liberal and National MPs in Victoria, that Michael O'Brien's tactic has fallen very hard on its face, and now there are certain political consequences, I suspect, that will follow.
On the flip side, let's talk more positive note. What's your proud to be Labor moment for 2020?
Oh, I'm going to have to head into new subject matter, I think, on this one. There's a couple of things around, actually, I'll touch on insecure work first and then go to another one if I can. The commitment in this year's budget to create an entitlement through a 2-year pilot with industry and business of sick leave and carers leave for anyone who needs it, irrespective of whether they're casual or not, is a huge step forward for the bubbling undercurrent of disadvantage that comes from insecurity of employment. And we've seen stagnation in wages growth, we've seen erosion of security of employment, and cuts to penalty rates. And the counterpoint to that, that devastation that's occurred as sort of work choices 2.0 in the federal space has been, again, the Premier's leadership in saying that one of the reasons that we've had so many challenges in the spread of coronavirus is that people have been needing to work multiple jobs, that they've been needing to, in fact, feed their families by going from one aged care facility to another and then going to another job, perhaps in cleaning or in retail, and therefore, placing themselves and others at risk. But that's been a lightning rod to saying, well, there's so much disadvantage at play here. And until we address the insecurity that's at play, we can't really change it. So there's a 2-year pilot, which won't be any cost to business, despite what those from the opposition may claim, to put that entitlement into place. Hopefully that will lead to a further evolution of workplace rights around the country, but it's labour through and through, and it's about taking care of everybody, particularly those who are vulnerable. The other thing that I want to highlight is the conversion practices legislation, which has been introduced in the Victorian Parliament and which passed the lower house in the last sitting week. It's still yet to be debated and hopefully passed in the upper house, but this is legislation which will outlaw practices which are intended to or have the effect of suppressing someone's gender identity. And it's been the subject of a lot of consternation from the Archbishop through to the Australian Christian lobby, but overwhelmingly it is supported because we know too many people who have suffered the trauma of conversion therapy, as it's been called, but which it is not, to try to pray the gay away. And we see the devastating impacts that that's had in lives which are filled with discrimination and filled with isolation and violence and lack of access to services and financial disadvantage and lesser life expectancies. We know that this is a step that is fundamentally important in improving the lives of LGBTIQ people around the state. And it's too late for many people who've endured those practices and taken their lives as a result. But what it does do is not only prevent those practices from occurring by outlawing them, it sends a really important message that this won't be tolerated. And it's the perception of rights being respected and of being seen for everyone, whether you're a member of our LGBTIQ communities or not, that everybody deserves the dignity to live as they are and to be respected for who they are, and not to be forced or encouraged or coerced to change simply because that's something that someone else decrees to be wrong.
I think one of the impressive things about Andrew's government is that even in the, I won't say tail end because I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but certainly in such a challenging year, that the government can remain focused on producing really good industrial and social policy and get it into the Parliament, and hopefully with some luck, well, not luck, but hopefully it gets passed in your chamber. When you come back after the New Year break. It's remarkable to have done that whilst, and I just don't know if our listeners, I think they would have, they're pretty astute politically, would have an understanding of the amount of work that went into trying to control the spread of the virus. That takes a ton of work in itself, but then to also have people working on developing good public policy and bringing it to a vote is a remarkable achievement. Chewing and walking and juggling all at the same time. Absolutely.
And again, this is challenging subject matter. Victoria under Jeff Kennett referred the vast majority of our industrial relations powers to the Commonwealth, and that continues to be the case today. So there is limited scope to the extent that the government of the day in Victoria can change workplace terms and conditions beyond the public sector. And that's why this pilot with business and with industry that reaches into the private sector to create an entitlement across the board is so important. It is the best lever possible to send that message that insecure work is unacceptable, not just for economic and social reasons, but as we've seen, for public health reasons too. And it is Labor through and through. It is a demonstration of the commitment to taking care of those who are disadvantaged for reasons beyond their control. And when you compare and contrast that with franking credits occurring at a federal level, where again we're looking after, because of the operation of Commonwealth law, the preservation of entitlements for people to secure a write-off in circumstances where they already have pretty significant amounts of cash in their bank accounts, nothing could be more stark as a reminder of why Labor does and will continue to do and must continue to do really important work for those people who don't have 7 investment properties.
This time last year on the podcast, we somehow started talking about all-time best Christmas carols. This year, I'm posing the question to you, and we talked about one particular film over a couple of drinks a couple of weeks ago. Top 5 Christmas films of all time. Not an easy list to pull together. I've done a bit of research and I've come up with my 5. I'm interested, Harriet Shing, to get an idea from your good self about what you think are the top 5 Christmas films of all time. And before you do that, notable not mention, as in notable shouldn't go in the list. And I don't, you're a classy person. I don't think it makes it in there. But the natural one that everyone would go with would be Love Actually.
Oh my God, can we talk about that for a second?
Yes.
I hate that film like you would not believe. And whenever I say this, I'm met with sort of pitying looks from the Hallmark card brigade. And I know that my partner is going to be quite upset with that classification, but it is such a terrible film, and it just dates every year. It becomes worse. It's like the half-life of any value that it ever had is sinking to dramatic new lows. And this die-hard crew of people that continue to defend a film that is, it's sexist, it's misogynist. The idea that, if you stand outside someone's front door with a bunch of cards that profess love to someone who had no idea after they've done a spooky, it's creeper level 5, that video of the wedding. If you put a different soundtrack to it, it could be something out of Helter Skelter. And every time I watch that, I don't actually watch the film. I'm subjected to random snippets of it at this time of the year in houses that I can now go to because of changes in restrictions. But whenever I see that bit with the cards and I see people saying, "Oh, that's so romantic," it actually, I'm not going to gild the lily. It makes me want to spew. And then I see, Emma Watson in that amazing piece of acting when she sits on the bed and gulps back a devastating kind of flow of emotion upon realising that she's received a CD instead of a necklace. But then goes back to it. She leaves the room and goes back to it, and that's seen as, the right thing to do. That in fact we see Hugh Grant talk to Billy Bob Thornton at a series of lecterns about how, love is the most important thing because apparently, if he gets the girl, then that's the reason to sing her praises. The idea of getting the girl, again, it makes the feminist in me very angry. It makes the kind of the film buff in me just really disappointed. A totally shit film. And if Margaret Pomerantz doesn't agree with me, then again, I can't continue to support it.
Look, if you're into stalker film, it's a great film. It's basically, 5 short stories of 5 male stalkers. And I don't say that in I'm trying to come off sounding like woke and in touch with, my feminist side. It's a terrible film. It's not a Christmas film. Nobody in their right mind should aspire to be like any of those male characters. Otherwise, if you do, then you've got some problems and you need to go talk to someone because you're a piece of shit. Like, these are not great people.
Well, that's the other thing, like, learn to play the drums and it'll all be fine. Oh, the Colin Firth character, what you've done here is you've opened a bag of snakes or a can of worms or whatever you want to call it. The Colin Firth character, they don't even speak the same language. When he goes to that villa to write his book and he falls in love with the cleaner after his relationship's fallen apart, and he spies on her. He literally spies on her while she's having a swim. It's gross, it's creepy, it's wrong, and yet everyone seems to think that it's adorable.
The only redeeming character is Colin Firth's niece when he goes to meet the family to drop off the presents, and then he turns around and leaves, and she says, "I hate Uncle Jamie." That's the only character that's nailed it. Otherwise,
you know what? I hate Uncle Jamie too.
Yeah.
I hate Uncle Jamie and I hate everyone else in the cast. And those characters, as far as I'm concerned, deserve to be erased from the history of film unless they're consigned to a list about the shittest films of the season.
Okay, so let's talk about the great films of the season.
I feel like I've just been in film school therapy. So that's been a good catharsis. Just send me the film.
Indeed. Okay, what's your top 5 Christmas films of all time?
All right, so I'm going to go with an all-time classic, Die Hard. Amazing Christmas film, and I will fight you if you think that that's not a Christmas film. It's aged beautifully. We've got heroes, we've got villains, we've got explosions, we've got Christmas trees. It's just watch it. Watch it for a good bit of relief, and also to see the magic of random fights for no particular reason. I would also say,
hang on, before you move on. Also, I literally watched it like a week ago, and you're right, it still holds up, and I forgot how many great lines it's got in there. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, no shit, lady, you think I'm trying to order a pizza, the back and forth between Bruce Willis and the cop down on the floor, on the ground level. It's perfection. It is perfection, and it's also deeply self-referential. It's witty as all get out. It's like when you turn on Play School and there's a narrative there for adults amidst all of the kind of jumping up and down with bunnies. When you watch Die Hard, it's got wry humor. It's satirical. It's there's a whole lot of hamming at various points as light contrast. It's perfect. So I would hang that on my Christmas tree of films to watch as number one. I reckon the second one for me comes down to the magnificent performance of Catherine O'Hara in Schitt's Creek. And that would be the ubiquitous Christmas film of Home Alone. Because if that hasn't taught every kid over the years about how to present massive safety risks to parents at home, in every way, from falling downstairs to tripping over obstacles, that's probably, I think, responsible for many visits to the hospital during the festive season, then I can't think of a better film. It's so cheesy. It's Kieran Culkin. Is it Kieran Culkin? Macaulay Culkin, that's right. It's him at his best and most adorable. It's kind of like looking at a picture of a puppy when you compare him to what he is now as an adult golden retriever. And it's just brilliant. And everyone needs to go around screaming Kevin randomly with their hands against their faces, because it's brilliant and there's not much more to it. A good bit of froth. Agreed. Continue.
Okay, I think I always really like to watch non-Christmassy films around Christmas, and so I'm going to throw in some Stanley Kubrick now for good measure. I've seen all of Stanley Kubrick's films, and I think he's got some serious issues around the way in which he depicts women and the way in which he develops certain of his characters. But I've got to say, films like Full Metal Jacket for me, it's one of those Vincent D'Onofrio, amazing performance. Again, being able to see a film that is spliced into two very different halves with, all sorts of kind of random falls from grace, gratuitous violence and the despair of the human condition. I mean, what's a better thing to do than sit around with some eggnog and watch it all fall apart? So I would say Full Metal Jacket, but also anything else from Kubrick. Another one which I really love, which is, again, a deeply unpopular choice, Barry Lyndon, a story from Kubrick, which is about the just about the weakest and most insipid character you might ever meet in a film. And he's just dreadful. He just it's a story of his life, and nothing really happens apart from the fact that he's woefully inadequate at most of it. But the cinematography is amazing. Kubrick is known for having, basically revolutionised the use of lighting, and because it's a period film, he used candlelight throughout the whole thing, which, it's like the modern day equivalent would be Mariah Carey saying, take out all the red Skittles, because it caused all sorts of headaches for production on set. But he used lenses that were developed by NASA to create the right ambient effect, because lighting wasn't so good. It's a great film to watch over the festive season as well. I would also suggest Gremlins as a brilliant Christmas film.
Yes.
I still, even now, at the age of 44, I know the little whistly tune that Mogwai does in the store before he's taken home and certain very bad things happen around feeding after midnight and getting wet. It's a spectacular film, apart from the fact that when I was little, it scared the life out of me because, Mogwai, everyone wants to be a Mogwai, but underneath it all, we've all got a gremlin. So a brilliant film, subversive, witty, fantastic, love it. And I reckon the final Christmas film for me isn't, again, it's another not Christmas film, but I seem to always see it around Christmas time. The Breakfast Club. It's an 80s classic. Everyone from Judd Nelson through to... So who else was in it? I think Molly Ringwald was also in The Breakfast Club, and she and Judd Nelson end up together at the end of the film before. And I think she gives him a diamond earring, and he walks across the football pitch as it's getting dark, and he air punches whilst Don't You Forget About Me kicks up and the screen darkens, and it's just, it's the iconic skill of the ages. And it's a beautiful nostalgic look back at what we wish our high school years had been, and it's also the way in which many viewers will discover a chip and sugar sandwich as being a pretty delicious way to make a meal if you don't have anything else. So that would be my list of Christmas films. They're not Christmas films, but they're good nonetheless, and they're good at this time of the year.
That's an excellent list. And my list, we have three double ups, sorry. I had, at number 5, I had Home Alone. At number 4, I had National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, just because I'm a sucker.
Brilliant. All right, I'm with you on that one. So my list's now just blown out.
Number 3, I had The Family Stone. Do you remember that film? I liked it because I identified with it as the insider watching the outsider come in, which was the Sarah Jessica Parker character, in which she's really trying to make it and please the mother and all that kind of stuff. And the Rachel McAdams sort of passag character, I feel like that was me, because I was in my sort of early, all through my teenage years, my older siblings were bringing partners into our family for Christmas, and I really identified with the Rachel McAdams character. So I loved it, The Family Stone, because I just feel like there's a reality there to how families integrate new families, which I think a lot of people may or may not identify with. Maybe I've just said too much about myself then as a teenager. And then, yes, Gremlins and...
No, it's good to actually see these films as a reference to yourself. That's excellent.
And then Gremlins, yes, completely agree. And then my number 1 was Die Hard. No, Die Hard is the greatest Christmas film of all time.
Oh yeah, I will absolutely back you in on that one. And then there's all the cartoons as well. I mean, there's so many really good animated classics at this time of the year too. I don't really like anything that Sarah Jessica Parker does though, so I'm going to have to disagree with you on The Family Stone. It's one of those things where it's too reminiscent of Sex and the City. Yeah. I don't want to see Carrie Bradshaw pretending to be someone else. So that's one of the challenges that I face, where someone is just so ubiquitous to the character that they've defended again, a dreadful series that's not aging well over a succession of years. It's hard to bust out of that way of being typecast.
Indeed. Well, look, we've really, I think we've almost broken our record in terms of how long we've been recording.
We haven't mentioned donkeys, though. Can I just say the importance of a nativity scene that involves actual animals is something that I'm going to put in a plug for, because this is, I was in fact not in possession of my small donkeys when we spoke last year, and I want to actually just say that if we're looking for highlights of the year, you can't go past a couple of donkeys that only really come up to waist high when they're stretching. It's a magnificent thing. But one of the things that I've in fact discovered is that creating a real life nativity scene where you dress the smallest dog up as baby Jesus while he's overseen lovingly by two donkeys who are Mary and Joseph respectively, while the greyhounds look on with the whippet as the three wise people, is just, I can't even tell you the joy that brings. Hang a star and you're there with bells on. So I think it's important at this time of the year for people to get into the traditions and the celebrations, even if you're not religious. It's about celebration, and I'm looking forward to posting a lot of spam over the festive season of my animals being forced into various situations of costume and ridicule wherever I can possibly find the opportunity.
Look, and props to you, Harriet. That's amazing that you went exactly an hour 20 without mentioning the miniature donkeys. So
I'm not going to pretend it wasn't hard. I've suffered greatly throughout this podcast, but having not woven it into the narrative, I think that they do deserve a plug, and seeing them randomly gallop around the back garden and then pretend to be small stallions at sunset while the clouds drift above them makes me feel like I'm a combination of the Marlborough Man and the Man from Snowy River. So they've been worth waiting for, and I hope that me dropping them in at this point at 1:20 has been worth waiting for as well. I know that you're anticipating hotly a conversation about my donkeys and what they've been up to in the first year of their lives.
I just was wondering when. I should have done an over-under sort of betting scenario with people about when would Harriet mention the donkeys.
Well, hedging is a popular thing at this time. So we do know that if governments can do it, then so can you. So I reckon a Moneyball style betting arrangement, even an illegal gambling ring might in fact be worthwhile for next year's podcast around when in fact I first dropped the donkey reference.
Oh, I will remember that. Now, before I say goodbye to you, I need to do some podcast admin. So just bear with me for 1 second. Just to let all of our viewers know that we are taking a week off. So no episode next week, but we will be back with a new episode in the new year, where we will do a preview of the Georgia Senate runoff with one of our good friends, Katie Parsons, will come on the show to give us a hand with that. And also we're going to be doing a bit more easy listening episodes over January, because you're either going to be at the beach or you're going to be at the cricket, and I remember as a kid, Current Affair would let Jan Event go on holidays and then they'd bring in someone else and it would be the summer edition, and it was actually an insight into what shit Current Affairs programming was going to look like for the normal part of the year. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to embrace our inner summer edition. So we're going to do some bit more lighthearted kind of episodes over the January period before we get into some of the heavier stuff again. Can I say thank you to all of our guests over the 2020 year that have come on the show and made Socially Democratic. Folks from Australia, the US, Britain, Sweden, New Zealand, the Maldives, and Cambodia. Thank you for your stories, your insights, and sharing your experiences that elevated Socially Democratic to the 192nd ranked political podcast in the country. And thank you to our production team in association with La Trobe University's media department, Pam Kirakides in semester 1 and Rebecca Connell in semester 2. Thank you to those two extremely talented women who did so much hard work to make the show run, lining up guests, doing research for the episodes, editing the episodes, publishing the episodes, and doing all the social media for the episodes as well. Thank you very much, Pam and Rebecca. And also thank you to our devoted, faithful podcast audience across the globe. Thank you for supporting the podcast in our second season and for helping to just promote the show by your retweets and shares and likes and recommending it through your family and friends and your networks. We do really appreciate that. And to all of our guests, we wish you a safe, happy, and holy festive season. And we look forward to you joining us in 2021 for season 3 of Socially Democratic. And Harriet Shing, once again, thank you for coming on and wrapping up another year of Socially Democratic. It's been wonderful to have you back on the show. And your insights are always welcome. Your hot takes, your top fives, and your just general enthusiasm about politics and life. We do appreciate you coming on the show today, and we wish you and your family a great Christmas break.
Thank you so much. It's actually really lovely to have a conversation to wrap up the year, and I would hope that everyone else gets to have these conversations over the festive season, and not just to debrief about what's been truly awful about the year and what's tested us, but also to celebrate the really wonderful human, caring examples of who we are and what's important to us. So please stay safe over the Christmas, New Year period. Wear sunscreen, be safe on our roads, and make good choices. And I'm really looking forward to coming back at some point in the new year to talk about donkeys a little more.
Love your work.